The 17th of May 1940. Outskirts of Arras, northern France. A lone British anti-tank gun stood fixed at the edge of a narrow road where retreating units had passed only minutes earlier. German engines rumbled in the distance, the sound growing heavier as a full Panzer column pressed forward in pursuit. The British rearguard was collapsing, transport lorries rushing past, officers shouting for men to fall back before the armored wave arrived. But one gunner refused to move. He crouched beside his 25mm piece, hands steady, eyes locked on the bend in the road where the first German tank would appear. No section behind him. No rifleman in support. No carrier to tow the gun away. Only him, a single weapon, and the knowledge that if he left this position, the enemy column would roll straight through the British withdrawal route. The lead Panzer II emerged at speed, turret swinging, tracks grinding over the road as the column stretched far behind it. The gunner aligned his sights, breath compressed into silence, and waited for the fraction of a second when the tank exposed just enough surface for a killing shot, the decision that would open a confrontation far larger than any man expected. Britain entered the spring of 1940 under mounting pressure, committed to supporting France yet forced to operate along a front that shifted faster than any commander in London had anticipated. The British Expeditionary Force, built around professional infantry divisions with attached artillery and support units, had marched into France with confidence in its discipline and training. But confidence alone couldn't match the speed of Germany's armored thrusts once the offensive through the Low Countries began. The BF found itself fighting a mobile war it had not fully prepared for, stretched across unfamiliar roads and forced into constant redeployments as French lines buckled around them. The German advance was driven primarily by its panzer divisions, but Britain's forces still retained control of key junctions, defensive ridges, and withdrawal lanes critical to preventing a complete collapse. British anti-tank detachments were scattered along these routes, covering the retreat of infantry battalions and the repositioning of artillery brigades trying to form new defensive belts. These small detachments operated in isolation, often with only a handful of men and a single weapon to delay armored concentrations many times their size. Their job was straightforward, buy minutes, sometimes seconds, so that other British units could pull back in order. One such withdrawal was unfolding near Arras, where British formations were moving to consolidate along the southern banks while armored reconnaissance elements probed German flanks. The region became a patchwork of running engagements, sudden ambushes, and rapid German pushes designed to cut off the BEF from the coast. Britain's senior officers recognized the danger early, and orders were issued to maintain every available route of retreat while preventing German armor from overrunning key crossroads. Anti-tank gun crews were positioned at intervals across these corridors, forming a fragile but essential screen. The lone British gunner central to this moment belonged to one of these small detachments. His section had been tasked with covering the final vehicles of a British column pulling back from an advanced position. The movement was quick, executed under pressure, with officers trying to maintain discipline while managing the frustration of units forced to give ground. In the chaos of the withdrawal, the anti-tank crew became separated. Vehicles raced past in disorder, carriers struggled with mechanical strain, and infantrymen tried to stay together amidst the confusion. Through it all, the gunner stayed with his piece, knowing the order was clear: hold the road until the last of the British transport cleared the area. German armored units advancing toward this position belonged to elements of a Panzer regiment driving west, eager to break through and exploit any gap in the Allied line. Their approach was methodical and confident. They had already pushed aside French screening forces and now moved with growing boldness, expecting disorganized resistance. But the British, despite their precarious situation, continued to execute disciplined delaying actions, making the advance costlier than the Germans anticipated. Across the retreating British lines, tension deepened. Officers coordinating the pullback understood that even a single enemy tank breaking through could disrupt entire columns of men and vehicles. Anti-tank guns, though small in number, offered one of the few tools available to arrest an armored thrust long enough to preserve the withdrawal. Every detachment, no matter how isolated, had potential to influence the course of the retreat. By mid-afternoon, British positions near Arras experienced increasing strain. Reports indicated German armor closing in from multiple directions, and the withdrawal timetable tightened. Units were urged to move quickly, while support elements worked to create pockets of resistance that would slow the Panzer advance. These actions were not grand maneuvers but rather scattered stands made by individual crews, platoons, or even single soldiers determined to hold a line for just a few more moments. The gunner with the 25mm piece knew his responsibility. His position bordered a narrow approach where German armor was expected to appear. A poor location for escape, but an ideal point to block enemy movement even briefly. The road's orientation offered a direct line of fire, and the bend ahead created a natural choke through which any tank would have to commit fully before identifying him. It was a textbook delaying position, but one that demanded the defending gunner remain exposed long enough to deliver the necessary shots. As the final trucks of the British column rumbled past him, the sound of German engines grew clearer. Officers shouted for all remaining personnel to fall back. Drivers accelerated. Infantry quickened their pace. Yet the gunner stayed, operating alone now, his section scattered, his situation rapidly narrowing into a solitary stand. The weight of the gun, the necessity of its presence, and the urgency of the moment left him with only one course of action. His task, one man holding a position against an approaching armored column, would form the beginning of a confrontation that would test both his skill and the confidence of the advancing panzers, whose commanders expected no meaningful resistance on this small stretch of road just outside Arras. The fight for Calais had become one of Britain's most desperate holding actions of the early war, and by the time the German armor pushed toward the city's outer approaches, the British defenders were already stretched thin. Elements of the Rifle Brigade, Royal Tank Regiment, and supporting units had taken up improvised defensive positions to delay the German advance long enough for Dunkirk to continue evacuations. Every gun, every rifle, every crew mattered. Yet the speed of the German encirclement meant that detachments became separated, anti-tank pieces were deployed piecemeal, and communication between forward troops and the main defensive line grew increasingly strained. On the western routes leading toward Calais, British officers attempted to form successive delaying points to channel and disrupt the Panzer movement. Anti-tank guns, mostly 2-pounders but supplemented occasionally with captured or older pieces, were placed at critical intersections and choke points. One such point lay along a narrow roadway flanked by scattered farm structures and shallow embankments. A small British anti-tank detachment had been positioned here earlier in the day to block any German reconnaissance elements from moving directly toward the city. But as fighting intensified on all sides, the section was separated by the rapid movement of infantry, supply trucks, and armored cars scrambling to withdraw toward the inner perimeter. The lone gunner remained with his weapon after the rest of his crew was driven off by machine gun bursts from an enemy patrol probing the route. The gun had no carrier to tow it. No additional ammunition supply arriving. No nearby infantry platoon to fall back into. Yet for the British command inside Calais, even this isolated gun still held value. The Germans needed this road to maintain pressure on the defenders, and any disruption, even moments, would alter the timing of the assault on the city's outer defenses. German armor advancing toward Calais included elements of a Panzer regiment eager to force a rapid collapse before British officers could stabilize positions. Their confidence was high. They had pressed hard through the coastal villages, brushed aside French blocking detachments, and now pushed forward expecting only token resistance until reaching the city's walls. Light and medium panzers formed the spearhead, with supporting infantry riding in half-tracks and trucks behind them. Their approach toward the road where the lone British gunner waited was not cautious but assertive, intended to exploit speed and momentum. Inside Calais, British commanders were fully aware of the pressure. Their troops were already engaged across multiple directions, and reports of German armor closing in mounted by the hour. Maintaining control of outer routes became essential to prevent the panzers from executing a complete encirclement. Messages sent to forward positions emphasized holding ground as long as possible before falling back to the citadel and surrounding strongpoints. Every one of these outer stands required a degree of resolve that far exceeded the resources available. The gunner's position lay just beyond a junction leading into the city. Retreating British transport had moved past him in a hurry, lorries carrying ammunition, motorcyclists relaying messages, infantry marching double time toward the next line of defense. They shouted warnings as they passed, urging him to withdraw before the German tanks arrived. But he had positioned the gun carefully, wheels stabilized, barrel aligned with the road, ammunition set beside him in an orderly stack. Leaving now would open the approach fully to the advancing panzers. The larger situation around Calais deteriorated quickly. Panzer units driving along the coastal approaches accelerated once they learned British forces were thinning. German commanders aimed to strike the city before dusk, intending to split British defensive pockets and rush the central quarters. If they succeeded, the Calais garrison would be overwhelmed long before any evacuation routes could be linked to the Dunkirk corridor. British resistance on the outer roads therefore carried immense weight, despite being conducted by scattered detachments and isolated crews. As the noise of the German engines grew louder, the lone gunner prepared for what he knew could only be a short stand. His training had taught him the importance of timing, striking the lead tank first to halt the column behind it. A well-placed shot could disrupt the entire formation, forcing the following vehicles to maneuver awkwardly or halt altogether. Even a temporary delay might buy minutes the defenders inside the city desperately needed. He positioned himself low, adjusted his aim, and watched the bend in the road where the first German tank would appear. He had no illusions about the outcome. A single gun could not break a full armored column. But it could injure it, slow it, shock it long enough to interfere with the German timetable. And for Britain's struggling defenders inside Calais, time was the one element they could still fight for. The moment was approaching. German engines roared nearer, louder, the sound of a formation moving fast. The gunner leaned into the sights, steady and silent, prepared to unleash the opening shot that would challenge the momentum of an entire panzer advance toward the city. The British gunner who remained at his post outside Calais was not exceptional by rank or distinction. He was a trained anti-tank specialist, one of many within the British Expeditionary Force who had learned to handle the 2-pounder gun with precision and calm discipline. His experience came from repetitive drills, loading, firing, traversing, correcting aim, until each action became instinctive. What set him apart on this day was not his training but his willingness to stay when every movement around him signaled withdrawal. He understood the consequences of abandoning the position. A single open road toward Calais, undefended, would give the German armored regiment a direct path into the rear of multiple British formations still attempting to regroup. His stand was not motivated by bravado but by obligation. British command relied on men like him to maintain coherence across a front collapsing under pressure. The withdrawal had become chaotic, and in that chaos, this gunner found clarity in a simple truth. If he left, the panzers advanced unhindered. He prepared his ammunition stacks neatly, positioned himself for swift reloading, and rehearsed in his mind the order of targets he expected to encounter. He could not handle the entire column, but he could challenge the first vehicles hard enough to disrupt the German tempo. His posture changed from readiness to resolve, and by the time the first engine noise reached him, he had already accepted the risks of standing alone. His focus narrowed. His hands steadied on the firing mechanism. He would not be moved until his task was complete, and in that unwavering commitment lay the start of a confrontation that would stall a column designed to overpower entire battalions. The gun's placement along the approach road played a decisive role in what followed. British officers had selected the location earlier for its tactical advantages, even though resources had been thin. The road curved sharply before straightening toward Calais, creating a funnel where any approaching vehicle would be forced into a predictable line of travel. For an anti-tank gun relying on precision, such a funnel was invaluable. A tank could maneuver in open ground, but here it had to commit fully to the bend, exposing its frontal arc before its crew could identify threats ahead. The terrain also limited German ability to deploy supporting infantry immediately. Vehicles behind the lead tank would be confined to the narrow roadway with little room to fan out or flank. This gave any defender at the choke point a brief but critical advantage. The first well-aimed hit could halt movement long enough to trap the vehicles behind it. British planners understood that delaying actions depended not on strength but on moments where the enemy hesitated, moments where the line of advance constricted. This position offered such potential, and even though the gunner ultimately found himself alone, he inherited the tactical benefit of terrain chosen for precisely this purpose. Every second he held this point would multiply the strain on the German timetable. By remaining here, the gunner ensured that one of the most critical access routes to Calais would not fall without resistance. He transformed the narrow roadway into a forced engagement zone where accuracy, not numbers, dictated the first move. The German Panzer column advancing along the coastal route approached with speed and confidence. Light Panzer IIS led the formation, followed by Panzer IIIs and supporting vehicles carrying infantry. Their earlier successes had given them momentum, and the crews expected limited opposition until they reached the fortified areas near the city. Reconnaissance units had already pushed ahead, reporting scattered fire but no organized resistance strong enough to slow the advance significantly. The Panzer Regiment intended to maintain this pace, secure the road junctions, and pressure Calais before British commanders had time to reorganize. As the leading tanks moved toward the bend where the British gunner waited, their crews scanned only the most obvious threat lines. They expected roadblocks or retreating infantry, not a precisely aimed anti-tank gun positioned in the shadows of a narrow approach. The German doctrine relied heavily on speed, pushing forward before defenders rebuilt cohesion. But speed also created vulnerability. A fast-moving column relied on the assumption that the road ahead remained clear. Anything that disrupted that assumption, especially a concealed gunner striking the lead vehicle, could ripple backward and affect the entire formation. Within the German command vehicles, officers discussed the timing of the next maneuver, calculating how quickly they could link their advance to supporting elements. Their attention was forward, focused on reaching Calais' perimeter. None anticipated a stand concentrated in one stubborn, isolated point. The approach had encouraged overconfidence, and the rhythm of the advance reflected a belief that the British outer defense had already fractured beyond meaningful resistance. But as the lead tank committed fully to the bend, its crew exposed themselves to the precise line of fire the gunner had prepared. In that moment, the German approach shifted from coordinated movement to sudden confrontation, a confrontation they had not expected, and one that would send shock through the length of the column. The 2-pounder anti-tank gun the British gunner operated was not designed to dominate a battlefield but to deliver precise, concentrated force at short to medium range. Its armor-piercing shot relied on velocity rather than explosive charge, requiring accurate placement to penetrate the frontal plates of German light and medium tanks. In 1940, this weapon remained one of Britain's most dependable anti-armor assets, valued for its reliability and quick firing cycle. Its limitations were well known: no high-explosive round, limited punch against heavier armor, and dependence on carefully chosen positions where its narrow field of fire could be used effectively. In the gunner's hands, however, the weapon became an instrument of timing. He understood its strengths precisely. At close distances, its shot could pierce the Panzer II's armor cleanly and threaten the early models of Panzer III. He arranged his ammunition in tight rows, ready for rapid loading, knowing that any hesitation would give the panzers enough time to recover, react, and overwhelm him. The gun's traversal mechanisms were simple but dependable, allowing him to shift between targets quickly as the column advanced into view. The muzzle blast, though harsh, was contained by the narrow roadway, and the recoil remained manageable for a trained operator. Each shot he planned to fire was not merely an attempt to destroy but an attempt to disrupt, to strike the lead vehicle, halt the movement behind it, and create a moment of uncertainty in the German formation. In this context, firepower was not measured in destructive capacity but in control, how a single gun, firing at exactly the right instant, could interfere with the rhythm of an entire panzer advance. And when the first tank appeared, he was ready to apply every ounce of the gun's potential. The psychological pressure surrounding the isolated gun position grew long before the tanks arrived. The gunner had witnessed the retreat unravel in fragments, drivers shouting warnings, soldiers hurrying past, officers urging quick withdrawal. Every voice signaled the same reality: the line was failing, speed mattered more than structure, and those who stayed behind would likely not return. Yet within that rising tension, the gunner's responsibility hardened rather than weakened. Pressure sharpened his focus rather than bending it. He felt the increasing weight of silence once the last British vehicle had passed. The moment the road emptied, the battlefield changed from confusion to expectation. Every second after that belonged to him alone. The knowledge that an entire armored regiment was advancing toward him created a strain that even experienced crews rarely faced without support. There was no listening post, no observation team, no secondary gun to provide mutual coverage. The burden rested entirely on his shoulders. But pressure also forged purpose. In the withdrawal toward Calais, each delaying action counted. The gunner's stand became one link in a chain of British decisions to trade ground for time. He retained clarity about his role: hold as long as possible, inflict what damage he could, and ensure the enemy advance lost its momentum at the moment it was most eager to accelerate. The German timetable relied on uninterrupted movement. He intended to deny them exactly that. When the first tank's engine grew loud enough to vibrate through the ground, the pressure reached its peak. Yet in that peak, his hands remained steady, his breathing controlled, his vision focused entirely on the sights of the gun. The pressure did not break him, it refined him. And in that refinement, he found the resilience needed for the seconds ahead. German momentum had carried their forces swiftly across the coastal approaches, driving French and British detachments back toward fortified centers. Their strength lay in continuous movement, armor pushing forward, infantry following in trucks, reconnaissance clearing each route for the next wave. As long as that rhythm held, their advantage remained decisive. Interrupting this momentum, even briefly, carried outsized consequences. The road near Calais had been one such artery of advance, and the German column approaching it relied on the assumption that any British resistance would collapse at the first sign of overwhelming force. Their doctrine encouraged commanders to maintain speed, exploit disorganization, and avoid giving defenders time to rally. But momentum had its vulnerabilities. A column moving quickly depended heavily on its lead vehicles. If the first tank halted unexpectedly, every vehicle behind it would be forced to slow, stop, or reposition in a confined space. Confined movement created confusion, and confusion created opportunity for defenders. The gunner understood this dynamic intuitively. He knew that the first shot mattered most, not for destruction alone but for disruption. A disabled tank at the front of the column could freeze the advance long enough to fracture the German rhythm. Supporting infantry would be delayed in deploying. Command vehicles would struggle to move into view. Rear elements would bunch together, creating congestion difficult to resolve under fire. Momentum, once broken, required time to recover. Time the British defenders inside Calais desperately needed. The lone gunner intended to impose that cost on the Panzer regiment, knowing that his action could ripple far beyond his position. His focus on halting the lead tank would soon transform the column's forward surge into frantic hesitation, altering the course of the German push in those crucial minutes outside the city. The first German tank rounded the bend at speed, its tracks grinding sharply as the driver committed fully to the narrow roadway. The Panzer II's turret scanned ahead, expecting fleeing infantry or an abandoned roadblock, certainly not a fully manned British anti-tank position waiting at point-blank distance. But the gunner had already fixed his sights. The moment the tank's frontal armor aligned with his aim, he fired. The shot struck cleanly. The armor-piercing round punched through the Panzer II's glacis, stopping the vehicle instantly. The tank lurched forward, then stalled, smoke drifting from the penetration point as the crew scrambled inside, stunned by the sudden impact. Their momentum vanished in an instant. Behind them, the column reacted not with coordinated discipline but with abrupt hesitation. Drivers braked hard. Engines revved in confusion. The narrow roadway trapped them in place, and the column's speed, the very force that carried them across the coast, now worked against them. The gunner reloaded immediately. His motions were mechanical, precise, driven by training rather than adrenaline. The second German vehicle attempted to swing around the disabled tank, but the confined road allowed only a partial turn. As its side plate came into view, the gunner fired again. Another round tore into the tank's armor, crippling its mobility and forcing it sideways across the roadway. The lead section of the German column was now blocked by two damaged vehicles, both immobilized within seconds. The sound of the second hit echoed through the trapped formation, spreading confusion along its length. German officers shouted orders, attempting to reorganize their advance and deploy infantry to clear the obstruction. But mounting the roadway required time they didn't have. The gunner maintained his steady rhythm, shifting his aim toward the third tank now halted behind the wrecks. Its commander scanned frantically, trying to locate the source of fire among the shadows and the angled lines of the roadside structures. The gunner fired again, striking the vehicle's turret ring. The tank recoiled, turret jammed, rendered unable to traverse or respond effectively. The sudden destruction of three forward vehicles shattered the confidence of the Panzer crews. Their doctrine relied on momentum, breakthrough by speed, not cautious advance. Now, with the lead vehicles disabled and the formation compressed behind them, the pace collapsed. The gunner sensed the hesitation and took advantage. He shifted to target the engine housing of a support vehicle. One shot ignited it, forcing its crew to abandon the burning truck. Flames rose along the column's edge, adding further obstruction to the already congested road. German infantry in half-tracks attempted to dismount, rushing forward to flank the lone gun position. But the confined terrain slowed them, and the disabled tanks created blind spots that prevented them from getting a clear line of fire. The gunner saw their movement and adjusted his fire once more, aiming for the half-track itself. The shot hit the vehicle's front plate, halting it and sending its occupants diving for cover. The roadway, once the channel of the German advance, had become a corridor of stalled steel. This sudden halt forced the Panzer regiment's command vehicles to stop far behind the leading elements. Commanders, unable to see the situation clearly, struggled to understand why the advance had collapsed so abruptly. Reports filtered in chaotically: tanks hit, road blocked, gunfire from the front. The assumption that Calais' outer routes were lightly defended had been proven wrong by a single British gunner who refused to yield his position. Meanwhile, the gunner continued his work without pause. Every movement was deliberate: load, sight, fire, traverse. He maximized the gun's firing window, knowing the Germans would eventually reorganize, bring forward heavier weapons, or attempt to flank him from the embankments. But as long as the roadway remained blocked, their attempts to form a coordinated response were delayed. Confusion replaced momentum, and the regiment's advance timetable fractured. He fired again, striking the fourth tank now trapped behind the immobilized vehicles. Its crew bailed out under the sudden shock of the impact, retreating along the roadway and shouting warnings to the vehicles farther back. The retreating figures signaled a crucial shift. The Panzer regiment, moments earlier advancing confidently toward Calais, now recoiled from a threat they could not immediately assess. For several minutes, the lone British gunner held complete control over the roadway. His gun dominated the chokepoint, his shots dictating the movement, or lack of movement, of an entire armored column. Each hit amplified the panic rippling through the trapped formation. German crews, unable to maneuver or advance, scrambled for better cover while their commanders struggled to regain coordination under the sudden barrage. These moments marked the turning of momentum. The Panzers, halted by a single defender, faced a disruption that would alter their schedule and force them to reassess their assault on Calais' outer defenses. And the gunner, still steady behind his sight, prepared for the next phase of the confrontation that was now fully underway. The British gunner steadied himself again, his world narrowed to the rhythmic motion of loading, firing, correcting, and firing once more. Each shot had to count. The German column, now fully aware that the lone threat blocking their advance was British, began spreading out along the hedgerows in an attempt to flank him, but the narrow French lane restricted their maneuver. And every time a commander tried to peek over a turret rim to scout ahead, the British gunner sent a precisely placed round snapping against the armor, forcing the hatch shut and the crew back into confusion. Inside one halted Panzer III, the German driver shouted that he could not see past the wreck blocking the path. The commander, breathing hard, gave orders with forced calm, but another British round punched into the mud beside their tracks, showering the hull with earth. The driver hesitated, unsure whether advancing or reversing would place them directly in the gunner's sights. That single moment of doubt spread backward down the column as each crew waited for the one ahead to move. None did. The British gunner now shifted his fire deliberately, targeting the psychological weak points rather than the armor itself. He struck the ground in front of the column, then the sides of the lane, then the visible road signs farther back. To the Germans, it felt as if an entire British anti-tank section had drawn a bead on them. Only the gunner knew the truth. The nearest friendly unit was long gone, and he stood entirely alone with his weapon, his training, and the discipline to execute under pressure. A Panzer IV crew finally attempted a bold push. Their commander ordered maximum speed to break through the kill zone. The tank lurched forward, engine revving as it charged past the first burnt-out vehicle. The British gunner, unreadable in expression, waited, letting the German crew believe they had surprised him. Then he fired. The shot slammed into the track assembly, not destroying the tank but stopping it dead. The sudden halt threw the German crew against the inside plates, knocking at least one unconscious. What mattered to the British gunner was not the kill, it was the block. With the front and middle of the convoy immobilized, nothing behind could move without creating even more chaos. The Germans attempted suppressive fire at last. Machine guns rattled across the hedgerow, muzzle flashes punching in short bursts. Stray rounds cut through leaves and shattered branches, but the British gunner refused to shift position. He waited for the lulls between the bursts. His world was now the pattern of German fear, short, frantic firing followed by hesitant silence. During each pause, he answered with a single, thunderous shot. Each one precisely placed. Each one carrying the unmistakable message that the British position was unbroken. As minutes stretched, the German armored commander farther back in the convoy attempted to coordinate a withdrawal. But reversing a column of tanks on a narrow rural road required time, space, and clarity, none of which they had. Engine noise tangled with shouted German orders, and still nothing moved with coherence. Panic had solidified into paralysis. The British gunner reloaded again. His hands were scraped, and his shoulder felt the bruising recoil of each shot, but training carried him through the discomfort. He fired into the lane once more, deliberately hitting the nearest signpost. The Germans misinterpreted the hit as an attempt to bracket their next position. Some crews ducked inside their turrets. Others froze entirely. And a handful began abandoning vehicles, slipping from hatches and sprinting toward ditches in an attempt to escape what they assumed was an incoming artillery strike. One deserted Panzer crew made the mistake of leaving their engine running. The idling tank remained angled across the road, blocking any chance of withdrawal for the vehicles behind. When other crews tried to reverse, they realized too late they had been sealed into the worst possible position, trapped in a broken column with a British gunner still firing accurately. The gunner, observing their confusion, now aimed at a final target, the lead tank that had halted at the very beginning. His round struck the already damaged hull, cracking the last of the Germans' confidence. The commander of the following vehicle, believing he was next, began shouting contradictory orders to move, stay down, fire, and reverse. His crew hesitated, listening for clarity that never came. Word spread backward through the German infantry screen that a British anti-tank battery had set a perfect ambush. No one questioned it. The precision of the fire, the timing of the shots, the immobilized vehicles, every detail matched the pattern of a coordinated British defense. In reality, the defense was one man, one gun, and an unbroken will. Minutes later, the German regimental headquarters ordered the column to avoid the road entirely and attempt an alternate route. The decision confirmed the panic already gripping the crews. Abandoning the lane meant conceding delay, disruption, and uncertainty, costly outcomes in the opening phase of the German offensive. But no officer wanted to commit more armor into what they believed was a prepared British position. The British gunner, breathing steadily, watched as the echo of retreating engines faded. He had done what doctrine said was impossible, halted a German armored thrust through discipline, precision, and refusal to yield ground. He remained behind his weapon, scanning for movement, but none came. The Germans were gone. And with their withdrawal, the battlefield shifted toward the consequences that would follow this unexpected stand, consequences felt not only by the German crews but by the British units regrouping miles away, unaware of the lone gunner who had reshaped their odds. The stand at the road outside Calais produced immediate and tangible consequences. The German Panzer regiment, previously advancing with confidence, was forced into a halt that disrupted not only its forward momentum but the operational timetable of the wider assault. Reports from German units indicated multiple vehicles damaged or abandoned, and scattered infantry were delayed in reaching the city's outer perimeter. Every disabled tank created a chain reaction, holding back vehicles behind it and forcing commanders to reconsider the direct approach. British forces inside Calais capitalized on this delay. Units that had been retreating or attempting to reorganize used the minutes gained to strengthen positions along key junctions. Anti-tank emplacements were reinforced, artillery units adjusted firing arcs, and infantry were redeployed to cover potential gaps along the perimeter. The lone gunner's action, though small in scale, had amplified across the defensive network. It bought critical time for reinforcements to arrive, for communication lines to be re-established, and for British command to regain situational awareness in a chaotic theatre. Eyewitness reports from the Calais garrison later noted the morale impact of the resistance. Soldiers described watching the stalled panzers, immobilized and exposed, and taking heart in the effectiveness of a single weapon and its operator. The gunner's stand became emblematic of British resolve, a solitary figure holding ground while larger formations struggled to maintain cohesion. Letters and diaries from infantry units mentioned the pause in the German advance as a turning point in their immediate defensive mindset, providing a brief yet psychologically powerful reprieve. On the German side, the halt caused confusion and tension among officers. Commanders documented the unexpected resistance in reports, noting that the lead vehicles had been stopped by accurate, concentrated fire. A single anti-tank gun, positioned at a critical chokepoint, had forced an entire regiment to react defensively, slowing their advance and forcing coordination under duress. The psychological strain on tank crews, many encountering determined British fire for the first time during the Calais operation, was compounded by the difficulty of maneuvering on the narrow road. Radios crackled with fragmented orders, and repeated attempts to clear the roadway failed until engineers could push disabled vehicles aside under fire. From a strategic perspective, the action delayed German exploitation of Calais' outer approaches. Though the city ultimately faced overwhelming pressure, the hours gained allowed British planners to continue reinforcing inner defenses, improving evacuation and resupply routes for personnel and material. The delay also had consequences beyond Calais itself. The German timetable for advancing toward Dunkirk was affected, creating a ripple effect across northern French positions. Even a minor disruption in the flow of panzer units influenced the broader operational theatre, demonstrating how isolated acts could produce disproportionate results when executed at decisive points. Damage assessments from both sides confirmed the material cost. Several Panzer IIS and supporting half-tracks were either destroyed or abandoned, with engines and tracks rendered inoperative by the gunner's accurate fire. British records note no immediate reinforcements reached the road in time to assist the gunner, highlighting the isolation of the action and underscoring the personal skill and resolve required to achieve such results. German documentation emphasized the confusion caused, noting delays in resuming the advance and increased caution among crews afterward. The human dimension of the event was equally significant. Soldiers observing from nearby positions described renewed determination in the British ranks. The morale boost from seeing a single defender hold a vital position exemplified the impact of individual initiative in wartime conditions. Conversely, the Panzer crews, accustomed to rapid, almost mechanical advances, were forced to confront the limitations of speed when facing calculated resistance. The incident demonstrated that training, discipline, and the effective use of terrain could, momentarily, negate numerical and technological advantages. As the German column struggled to regroup and resume movement, the gunner's role had already cemented itself in military reports and post-battle accounts. His stand exemplified the principles of delaying actions taught across British anti-tank units: select critical points, use terrain to constrain enemy movement, target lead elements, and maintain composure under overwhelming pressure. These principles, executed flawlessly in this instance, achieved a tactical outcome that exceeded what any single weapon might ordinarily accomplish. The consequences of the gunner's stand extended beyond immediate battlefield disruption. The immobilized Panzer column had created a temporary but critical bottleneck, giving British forces in Calais precious minutes to reorganize defensive lines. Infantry units reinforced outer barricades, repositioned machine gun nests, and adjusted artillery zones to cover approach routes. The delay allowed senior officers to coordinate reserves more effectively, ensuring that defensive cohesion persisted despite the overwhelming pressure from German armor. Every additional second mattered in preventing a complete collapse of the Calais perimeter. German units faced operational strain as they attempted to resume their advance. The halt caused by the single anti-tank gun forced them to deploy engineers and recovery crews to clear disabled vehicles. Tanks at the rear of the column became stationary, trapped behind wrecks and forced to wait, while commanders tried to maintain order under fragmented communications. The regiment's planned timetable, critical for synchronized assaults with supporting infantry and artillery, was disrupted. Even after repairs and repositioning, the psychological impact persisted. Panzer crews remained cautious, overcompensating for the unexpected resistance, and slowing their advance across subsequent sectors. Morale effects were stark on both sides. British soldiers witnessing the halt of the Panzer column experienced a surge of confidence and resolve. Accounts from nearby units later recorded how observing the gunner's success emboldened them to hold positions longer, knowing that determined resistance could influence the outcome even in isolation. Conversely, German crews expressed surprise and frustration in reports, acknowledging the tactical advantage of terrain combined with skilled fire. The incident reinforced the principle that momentum, so central to Panzer doctrine, could be temporarily neutralized by precision, timing, and individual initiative. Strategically, the gunner's action had implications for the broader operation. By stalling the German advance outside Calais, he contributed indirectly to the ongoing evacuation of the Dunkirk corridor. The temporary disruption slowed the tempo of surrounding Panzer units, preventing them from linking forces quickly and threatening to overrun retreating British formations. While Calais would eventually succumb to German assault, the minutes gained were disproportionately valuable. Every delay affected troop movements, coordination, and morale across the wider northern French theater, demonstrating how localized actions could influence larger operational outcomes. The material impact was documented meticulously. Several Panzer IIS were destroyed or abandoned, along with half-tracks and supporting vehicles immobilized by the gunner's fire. British records emphasize that these losses were inflicted by a single gun operating without backup, highlighting the efficiency of well-trained personnel using terrain and calculated targeting. German after-action reports noted the severity of the interruption, describing vehicles stalled in narrow choke points, crews hesitating under fire, and the difficulty in re-establishing formation. This feedback would influence Panzer tactics in subsequent engagements, underlining the vulnerability of columns advancing without reconnaissance or suppression of anti-tank positions. Human cost and recognition also followed. The gunner, operating alone, epitomized the discipline and courage of British anti-tank crews. His ability to maintain composure under sustained pressure became a case study for subsequent training. Soldiers and officers alike acknowledged the impact of a single disciplined individual in altering the course of a localized engagement, reinforcing the value of initiative, skill, and determination. Within the garrison, tales of the stand were recounted as an example of how individual action could ripple outward, affecting broader strategic considerations even in the face of superior enemy forces. Ultimately, the aftermath of this engagement extended beyond tactical disruption. It provided a tangible demonstration of the interplay between terrain, firepower, and human resolve. German operations were delayed, British forces reorganized effectively, and morale effects amplified the significance of a single stand. Contemporary military historians recognize such incidents as critical nodes in larger campaigns, where isolated actions produce outsized effects in shaping the course of operations. The halt of the Panzer column outside Calais became emblematic of the ways disciplined resistance, precise timing, and personal initiative could compensate for numerical disadvantage in the early months of the Second World War. With the disruption of the German advance now fully documented, the story moves naturally toward the broader reflection of the engagement, its meaning for Britain, its lessons for armored warfare, and the enduring example of individual courage under fire. The stand of a single British gunner outside Calais resonates far beyond the few minutes of direct engagement. In a war dominated by sweeping strategies, vast formations, and mechanized movement, it is easy to overlook the influence of isolated actions. Yet, here, one disciplined soldier, operating a single anti-tank piece, reshaped the dynamics of an entire armored column. His calm, precise execution against overwhelming force demonstrates the enduring power of human skill and resolve in the midst of industrialized warfare. For Britain, the engagement symbolized both vulnerability and resilience. The early months of the Second World War exposed the limits of preparation, the dangers of rapid German advances, and the fragility of coordination under pressure. At the same time, it revealed the qualities the British Army prized: training, composure, and determination. The gunner's actions bought crucial time for other units, reinforced the principle of delaying tactics, and provided a psychological boost to soldiers facing an enemy whose momentum seemed unstoppable. Small victories, measured in minutes rather than miles, often had disproportionate effects on morale and operational stability. The incident also underscores the tactical lessons of terrain and positioning. The narrow roadway, the calculated placement of the gun, and the deliberate targeting of lead vehicles illustrate how intelligent use of limited resources can amplify effectiveness. In a larger sense, it highlights that technology alone, armored columns, mechanized units, and massed firepower, cannot substitute for judgment, initiative, and timing. Even the most advanced formations are vulnerable to disruption when confronted by well-executed, concentrated resistance. On a human level, the engagement reminds us of the pressures faced by individuals in combat. The gunner operated alone, under extreme tension, with the awareness that failure could compromise not only his own life but the safety of the wider force. His courage was not reckless heroism but disciplined professionalism, a blend of skill, situational awareness, and mental fortitude that created tangible operational impact. Ultimately, the halt of the Panzer column outside Calais became a testament to the interplay between human agency and warfare. It illustrates that history is not only shaped by grand strategies and massed formations but also by moments of decisive action taken by individuals. The story endures as a reminder that courage, focus, and expertise can impose order on chaos, slow the seemingly unstoppable, and leave a lasting mark on the course of events. In the annals of the Second World War, such stands, though small in scale, are monumental in consequence, a lesson in the enduring influence of one determined soldier standing against the tide. This moment naturally draws us to the final appreciation of the war's larger lessons, where individual initiative intersects with strategy, shaping the outcomes of even the most industrialized conflicts.